Yeah, so Jeffrey Hopkins died last night. I thought everybody knew. That's why the book is there. This was actually his PhD thesis back in the 60s, I think. You know, when most people in America never even heard of Tibetan Buddhism. You know, he was already studying with lamas and getting a PhD at Harvard, isn't it? Harvard University, and learning Tibetan and Sanskrit. And then, yeah, just his speciality was emptiness. And I mean, he had connection from past lives, clearly, but, just amazing mind, being able to understand this incredibly difficult topic of emptiness and then, write about it and translate material about it into English, making it accessible to us in this country and in other Western countries. So yeah, he was an amazing person. How old was he? 80 something? 83. Okay. A good long life. And yeah, his work will continue. Many of his students, he was professor at the University of Virginia for many years, and they had a program that produced a number of professors, PhD, um, like Guy Newland, Donald Lopez, I think. I can't remember all of them, but many of them, and they have been writing and translating and teaching and so on. So the work has continued and will continue. So another person to pray for. I mean, I think there's probably no doubt about him having a fortunate rebirth. He's probably already there in the Pure Land, teaching the gods in the Pure Land, the deities in the Pure Land about emptiness. Yeah, really amazing being. So we're fortunate that we did have some connection with him. So yesterday I mentioned one of the ways that we can have a more positive outlook and enhance our own happiness and well-being, and that is by reflecting on the kindness of others. So there's so many examples of that in our life. Everything we have and use and enjoy comes from others. We are dependent on others for everything in our life. Maybe you could think of a couple of examples of that in your own life and see if that can help to enhance your concern for others, your sense of altruism, wanting to help others, to repay their kindness. So then, with that sense of altruism, appreciation, concern for others, wanting to do what we can to help them, then see if you can make that your motivation for being here this morning, listening to this talk, and doing whatever else we do here today. So, yesterday, um, we were looking at some Western perspectives on grief and resilience, and today I thought to go back to the Buddhist teachings about things. And before I forget, this afternoon session will be taught by Venerable Chunyi, because I double booked myself. I've been teaching a course in a center in New York City, a Zoom course, and we have our last session today, so it clashes with this retreat. So Venerable Chunyi kindly agreed to fill in, and she's got lots of knowledge. She's been collecting material about grief, so I'm sure that will be very valuable. And there was a question here yesterday that I forgot to answer. Well, it's actually two questions. The first is, did the Buddha say it's not possible to realize selflessness or the nature of reality without ethical conduct, not harming and benefiting others? So I didn't have time to look for an actual quote from the Buddha about that. I'm sure there's many. Because, yeah, I think as far as I know, in all traditions of Buddhism, they stress the importance of ethical conduct as a kind of basis for our practice. And like the teachings on selflessness and emptiness are quite high level, advanced. And a lot of people are really interested in those teachings and kind of, zero in on those, try to learn them and meditate on them and so on. But yes, it's if we don't have a firm basis in ethical conduct, then we might get some intellectual understanding of emptiness, but we won't be able to get an actual realization of it. And so I was thinking when I read that question that what I've been doing up to now is just taking bits and pieces from Buddhism here and there, and maybe some of you are not so familiar with Buddhism and the Buddhist path. So I thought this morning to just give a kind of brief overview of the Buddhist path and where some of these things fit in, things like ethical conduct and selflessness and so on. Because otherwise, if we just hear a bunch of random teachings about this and that, and it could be a little confusing. So I thought to do that this morning. I'll see how far I go. I did find one quote in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo talking about, oh, maybe I'll leave that till later when I get to the 3 trainings. Okay, so a good way to understand Buddhism in a sort of nutshell, in a condensed way, is with the Four Noble Truths. And the Dalai Lama, in fact, says, when teaching Buddhism to people coming from a different background, not brought up in a Buddhist culture, then it's good to start with the Four Noble Truths, also the 2 truths, but that's a little more difficult to understand. Not a little, a lot, a lot more difficult to understand. So I'll start with the 4 Noble Truths. So after the Buddha attained enlightenment, the very first teaching he gave was on the Four Noble Truths. And we looked, the first day, there was a quote on the slide from that teaching where the Buddha talked about suffering. So the first of the Four Noble Truths is suffering, true suffering. Although the term in Sanskrit and Pali is dukkha, which different translators try to render it in different ways. I think Venerable Children just sticks with the word dukkha because it's hard to find a good equivalent in English. But probably better than suffering would be dissatisfaction or unsatisfactoriness, because the word suffering usually is very strong, and we think of really heavy things like what's going on in Gaza, or somebody dying of cancer and a lot of pain, and like really heavy, horrible experiences. Whereas dukkha, it does refer to those, but it refers to a lot of other experiences as well that aren't so intense, and in fact things that we probably wouldn't even consider to be suffering. So in the Tibetan tradition, I think it comes from the Buddha. I'm pretty sure it comes from the Buddha, but there's this one explanation of dukkha in terms of three types of dukkha, and this is said to encompass all different forms of dukkha. So it's a good way of understanding what the Buddha was talking about when he spoke about dukkha. And so the first type of dukkha is called, well, the suffering of suffering, or the dukkha of dukkha. And that refers to experiences that everybody recognizes as painful. You don't have to study anything to learn or to know that this is dukkha, that this is painful. So that includes all kinds of physical pain, injury, disabilities. So anything on the physical level that is painful, unpleasant, problematic, as well as on the emotional level, like grief. It's probably one of the strongest types of mental suffering that people have. But there's lots of others as well, like depression, anxiety, fear, worry. What else? Mental suffering. There's a thick book like this of, psychiatric disorders. It's probably the list growing all the time. So there's a lot of, that type of suffering as well. I heard once Mother Teresa said something about how it's not so difficult to help with the suffering in the East, meaning like Asia, India, and so on, because it's mainly physical, physical suffering, hunger and sickness, and so you can provide food and medicine and so on. But when it comes to the suffering in the West, that's more difficult because it's mostly mental. So in developed countries like here, of course there is some physical suffering, but there's probably a lot more mental suffering. And that's harder to deal with, harder to help, harder to treat. But anyway, so this first type of dukkha covers all the experiences that we have that we immediately know are painful. And also, it doesn't take a human mind to understand this. Animals, also any kind of living being is able to recognize that is painful. And they try to avoid it. They try to, get relief from it. So that's the first type of suffering. That's easy to understand. And then the second type of suffering, or dukkha, is known as the dukkha of change. This refers to experiences that initially appear pleasant. Our first reaction to these is, oh, this is nice, this is enjoyable, this is pleasant. But it's not real pleasure, real happiness. It doesn't last. It's temporary, transitory. It always changes. It changes. And when it changes, um, then it's usually replaced by suffering, by unsatisfactoriness. So one of the best examples of that is eating. I think most people like to eat. it's, it's a source of pleasure and enjoyment. But the Buddhist teachings say, if that was true pleasure, if that, the pleasure of eating was true, genuine pleasure, it should last. It should, continue. But the reality is it doesn't last. There's different things that happen. One is if you keep eating, you think, oh, this is so nice, and you can't stop. Then sooner or later it turns into suffering. You're full, you have indigestion, and yeah, if you keep making a habit of that, then you may get certain types of illness. So continuing to try to get pleasure from that experience will just lead to suffering. And even if you know when to stop, most people are able to stop when it's the right time. And we're comfortable for a while. Our hunger is satisfied. But sooner or later, after a couple of hours, then we're hungry again. Right? So the eating of food didn't really take away the suffering of hunger. It was just like a temporary respite from that suffering. Yeah. So they say if the pleasure of eating was real, genuine, lasting happiness or pleasure, it would continue. It wouldn't disappear after a while. So that's not the case. And that's just one example, but the same is true for anything else that we usually consider pleasant, a pleasant experience, an enjoyable experience. For example, listening to a certain type of music that you like. Different people like different music. Okay, so when we're listening to the type of music we like, we feel, nice, there's pleasure there. But if that was real pleasure, then you should be able to continue listening to that music of over and over and over, and the pleasure would continue and should grow. But what usually happens is we get sick of it, right? Like we have to turn it off. Okay, I've heard that enough, turn it off. If it kept going continuously on and on and on, after a while it would turn into suffering rather than pleasure. And another example, just with our body and the different positions, the different postures we put our body in. Like right now we're sitting down. And, when we first sit down, it probably feels comfortable and pleasant, especially if we've been on our feet for a long time, and our legs are tired, our feet are tired. Sitting down feels good. But if sitting down really was genuine happiness, genuine pleasure, it should continue. Yeah? We should be able to continue sitting hour after hour after hour. But what happens? It turns into pleasure eventually. You get tired of sitting. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it turns into suffering. Yeah. So yeah, and then when we do get sick of sitting down, it becomes kind of uncomfortable and bearable. Then we stand up. We say, "Oh, I need to stand up and stretch my legs." So we do that, and that feels good at first. Yeah, standing up feels good. Oh, now I can stretch my legs. But if that was real pleasure, we should be able to continue standing and it would continue to be pleasurable. But is that what happens? Yeah, if you continue standing, being in a standing position. I mean, a lot of people spend a lot of their time, nurses, doctors, and people working in restaurants and cafes, and lots of people, they spend a lot of time standing up, and it's suffering. right? First few minutes, maybe, first hour, okay, but you know, the longer you stand, the more painful it is, and you probably get some physical problems as well. Um, so our usual experience is, you know, after a while, oh, I'm tired of standing, I need to sit down. So you sit down again, but then the same thing happens, yeah? So if you pay attention to what you're doing with your body, it's like all day long we are trying to find a comfortable position for our body, either sitting or standing, lying down, walking, running, standing on our head, whatever. But whatever position we put our body in, even though in the beginning it may be comfortable, even pleasant, but that doesn't last. Eventually it turns into something unpleasant, and then we have to change to a different position. Even when we're lying down, that's probably the most comfortable position for most people, right? Lying down in bed. But what do we do when we're lying down in bed? Do we stay in the same position all the time? Or do we turn, you know, this side, that side, on our back, on our stomach, curled up, stretched out? You know, it's like even when we're asleep, our body is moving. And why it moves is because it's not comfortable. It's trying to find another position that's more comfortable. And then that one becomes uncomfortable. We have to have another one. Same with sitting, you know, like very difficult to sit perfectly still, because whatever position, whether it's cross-legged or sitting in a chair or whatever, you know, sooner or later, it starts to, we have aches and pains here and there, and so we have to shift to a different position. Yeah. So those are just some examples of how the experiences we normally consider to be pleasant, pleasurable, enjoyable, and these are talking about experiences within samsara. For enlightened beings, you know, Buddhas and Arhats and something, that's different. But you know, for us unenlightened beings, this is the experience. And so, yeah, from the Buddhist point of view, that kind of what's called samsaric pleasure, worldly, mundane pleasure, is not genuine pleasure or happiness, but it's considered another type of suffering, or dukkha. It's probably better to say dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, because it's hard to really see that as suffering, but it's dukkha. It's unsatisfactory. It doesn't satisfy. It doesn't bring genuine and lasting satisfaction. And also, this kind of pleasure, our usual experiences of pleasure, usually lead to attachment, to craving. Yeah, our mind gets attached to that experience, and we want to keep having it again and again and again. And that itself can lead to more dukkha, more suffering, because we can't always get what we want, right? Especially if you travel, you go to other countries, you can't always get the kind of coffee or tea or food that you're used to, and then you're, you know, really unhappy because you can't have those tastes that you're used to and that you enjoy. And then also having attachment, when we develop attachment to one kind of object or one kind of experience, it's, I think, unavoidable that we also have aversion to the opposite type of experience. Yeah. You like one kind of taste, and then you have aversion to the opposite kind of taste. You have one kind of bodily feeling. You have attachment to one kind of bodily sensation, bodily experience. And then when the opposite type of experience happens, then there's naturally aversion to that. And aversion is painful, yeah? Because again, we can't always control what we encounter, what we experience. And so our mind is like constantly tossed back and forth or up and down between feeling attachment, craving, desire for one type of experience, and aversion, even anger towards the other type of experience. So if we look at that kind of experience, those states of mind, and ask ourselves, is this happiness? Is this real, genuine happiness and peace? I mean, for most people, it's the only thing they know. They don't know anything other than that. But those who practice meditation do find more satisfying experiences. So I came across one explanation in a book by Aya Kemma, who was a German woman who became a nun and a teacher and a writer. And so in one of the books, she explained 4 kinds of happiness. And I found that really helpful, just to know that, yeah, not all happiness is the same. There are different kinds of happiness. So one kind of happiness is sensory happiness. That's what we experience with our senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, bodily sensations. So when we encounter some object that we consider pleasant with any of our 5 senses, then we feel happy. There's an experience of happiness. And that's okay. I mean, Buddhism doesn't deny that that is the case, that there are pleasant experiences that we can have with our senses. But again, it's temporary, it doesn't last. It's very temporary. And it's also kind of unreliable in the sense that you need that object or that experience or that external thing to be able to have that pleasure. And if it's not available, if you're in a place where you can't have that particular object or experience, then you miss out on that pleasant experience. So it is a certain type of happiness or pleasure, but it's not really lasting or reliable or genuine. And then another kind of happiness I like to call spiritual happiness, and that comes more from within, from our own state of mind when we have positive attitudes, positive qualities. For example, love, genuine love, concern, kindness towards another person or towards other people, beings. So that state of mind is very nice. We all know that, right? We all know what it's like to feel love, to care about someone and reach out and do what we can to help. It's a different kind of happiness than the first one. It's more other focused. The first one tends to be more self-focused. I enjoy this, right? Whereas the other one is more in relation to others in a very positive way, in a very caring way. So we're more focused on others and their happiness and their well-being, and we do things that bring them happiness or relieve their suffering. And so that brings another kind of happiness that's deeper and more spiritual and probably more satisfying. I read about I think it was a survey that was done with some Harvard students, and they were asked, what gives you more satisfaction, if you give something to someone else or if you give something to yourself? And the majority said they felt better giving to somebody else. Yeah. So that's something we can check ourselves. How does it feel when we go shopping and buy something for ourselves, just for me, compared with when we buy something for another person with genuine care and concern and kindness, wishing them to be happy? So there's probably a difference there in the quality of that experience. And also included in the second type of happiness, I think, would be, a contentment when we do start engaging in spiritual practice, and we can reduce our strong afflictions and maybe get a little bit of peace in meditation, maybe some insights in meditation, helping our wisdom to grow. So that also is very enjoyable, very satisfying. And it's coming more from inside of ourselves rather than from out there. So that type of happiness is, if we check, we'll probably find it is more satisfying. And it's also more reliable because we don't need certain objects or people or places in order to have that kind of happiness. We can learn how to have it anywhere, anytime, even in prison, even in, there are lots of people, incarcerated people in prison who learn meditation and practice meditation and work with their minds. And they're able to find real peace and happiness, even in such a unpleasant, difficult situation, cut off from family and friends and the things they normally want to have. Yeah, so there's advantages to that second type of happiness. And then she says there's a third type of happiness which comes from concentration. When you develop your ability to stay focused on your chosen object of meditation, and your mind is able to stay in a state of single-pointed concentration for, a good period of time, then that gives rise to physical and mental bliss. I'm not talking from firsthand experience, but those who have had that, they say it's the best bliss you've ever had. It's better than anything else that we've ever experienced. Your body is filled with bliss. Your mind is filled with bliss. You can just sit there happily. The lunch bell rings and you don't want to get up and go and have lunch. You're just enjoying yourself so much. So that's an even better quality type of happiness or bliss. And then she mentions a fourth one, which is that which arises from wisdom. So when you develop the wisdom, understanding the true nature of things, then that brings an even greater happiness. And I think the reason for that is because wisdom is the antidote to the afflictions, to our disturbing emotions like attachment and aversion and jealousy and all these things that, toss and turn in our mind and make our mind so unpeaceful and disturbed and unhappy. So once we've got the antidote to those, those afflictions, and especially, they don't all go away at once, but, gradually over time, we can eliminate those afflictions in our minds so they just don't even come up anymore. We don't even feel angry. We don't even feel attached and craving anymore. So once those have been, subdued or even eliminated, then the peace, the happiness is out of this world, literally. So, yeah, I found that explanation really helpful, that not all happiness is the same, right? The happiness of an ordinary person eating a hot dog or drinking Coke or whatever, and the happiness of somebody sitting in meditation with really good concentration, or the happiness of a Buddha or an Arhat are very, very different quality. And so, sometimes it may sound as if the Buddha, Buddhist masters, the Buddhist teachings are telling us we shouldn't enjoy ourselves. We should give up our enjoyments, our pleasures, and so on. But it's not really like that. The way I think of it is the Buddha is trying to get us to have the best quality happiness. He wants us to be happy, but he wants us to have really good quality happiness, not sort of cheap, momentary happiness, but the best quality happiness. So his teachings are guiding us in, what we need to do to be able to have these better quality, more satisfying forms of happiness. So how did I get caught? I didn't. Oh yeah. So I was talking about the second type of dukkha, which is called the dukkha of change, and it refers to these kind of imperfect and transitory experiences that we normally consider happiness and pleasure. But within this framework, they're considered actually another type of dukkha, not real pleasure, not real happiness, because there are these higher much better forms of happiness that we can attain. But as long as we're still attached to the sensory pleasures, this first type of experience, if we have a strong attachment and craving for those, we won't be able to attain those higher forms of happiness. Because to be able to attain those, we need to work on our mind. We need to learn how to keep our mind focused and concentrated in meditation. And if we look at why we have trouble concentrating when we're trying to sit and meditate, and even concentrating on the breathing, and it's so hard, to stay with the breathing, even for 2 or 3 breaths. The mind just keeps running away. So if you look at where your mind is running to, right? What is your mind distracted by? Most of the time it's related to these kind of pleasures, sensory pleasures. You think about past pleasant experiences that you had, or you think about future ones that you hope to have, or even present experiences like, somebody's playing music and it's the kind of music you like, and your mind just goes, or you smell the food cooking in the kitchen, your mind goes, So we may sometimes be distracted for other reasons, but I think my experience is most of the distractions are related to sensory pleasures, pleasures of the senses, which is that first type of happiness. So as long as we're still kind of hung up there, attached to those types of experiences, then our mind will not be able to develop the higher forms of happiness. So, yeah, those are reasons why it's considered another type of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. And we need to recognize that and gradually detach ourselves, let go of our attachments. And that's not easy to do that. I mean, attachment is really, really hard to overcome. In fact, you can't really overcome it until you realize emptiness, selflessness. But in the meantime, there are things we can do to reduce our attachment, like impermanence. One of the best antidotes to attachment is impermanence, the changing nature of things, just contemplating that whatever it is we're attached to is subject to change. It's not always going to be the way it is now. It won't always be there for us to have that pleasure. Also, the pleasure itself is impermanent. It doesn't last. Yeah, so just getting more familiar with the impermanent nature of things helps us recognize, this doesn't make sense to have attachment. Because attachment is wanting things to be permanent, always there, just like that, the way they are right now. And that's just asking for the impossible. It doesn't make any sense. So this takes time. But the more we contemplate impermanence, get familiar with impermanence, that will really help us to have less attachment. That's a gradual thing, gradual process. And it's probably best to start with maybe things you're attached to that aren't even good for you. We all have those things we like to eat or drink or smoke or do that may even be harmful for our health and our ability to have a long life. So we could start by, weaning ourselves of those, or sometimes just people are able to stop. No, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to use that or buy that or drink that or whatever. Other things are harder to just stop. Especially food. I mean, we can't just stop eating food. We need it to survive. But we can still maybe reduce the amount that we eat, or certain types of foods that we eat that aren't good for us. So we can gradually reduce our attachments. And we need to do this with kindness and compassion towards ourselves, and not in a kind of heavy way where we force ourselves to give something up or beat ourselves up because we still have attachment when we think we shouldn't. So it needs to be done, yeah, compassionately. But just to understand, it is a gradual thing, and you can't immediately. I didn't know that in the beginning. When I first learned Buddhism, I was very young and very eager, and I really thought, I'm going to get rid of all my attachment. And after a few months, I noticed there was still some attachment there, and I started beating myself up, feeling really bad, crying. So, yeah, Mama Yeshe used to tell us, slowly, slowly. Yeah, you're not like mushrooms. You know, mushrooms like overnight. You can have a mushroom. Enlightenment isn't like that. Yeah, slowly, slowly. So I had to learn the hard way that, yeah, it takes time to change the mind. And they have a saying in the Tibetan tradition. They say, following afflicted negative states of mind is as easy as a boulder rolling down a hill, but generating positive, beneficial, constructive states of mind is like pushing a boulder up a hill. It is like that, isn't it? Like, it's effortless to have attachment and anger and jealousy. They just pop up in our mind. But trying to have non-attachment, trying to have love, compassion. I mean, sometimes those arise spontaneously, but sometimes we really have to make an effort, and it's not easy. So just to know that that's how it is. You know, the masters, the great Indian and Tibetan masters, recognized that and talked about that. So, okay, that's how it is. We just have to accept that and keep working at it. And slowly you can see changes happening. I can see that. So you just have to not give up, not get discouraged and give up, but keep going. So anyway, that was a bit of a digression about the second type of suffering, or dukkha. But it is, I think it is important, because otherwise it can be misunderstood and yeah. And then the third type of dukkha is called pervasive suffering, or sometimes pervasive compounded suffering. It's a little bit complicated, but it refers to just the fact that we are in this situation of having this body and mind, these aggregates, which are under the influence or under the control of karma and afflictions. This is not easy to understand. They say you have to kind of study a lot, think a lot, meditate on this to understand it. But like the origin of this person we are, this being we are, this life that we have, the origin is karma and afflictions. Karma that was created in past lives under the influence of afflictions, ignorance, attachment, anger, and so on. And so, you know, in a past life, whoever we were back then, you know, created some action under the influence of afflictions. And as a result of that, this life came about. We were born in this life with this body and mind combination. And so it's like the result, the outcome of karma and afflictions. Like I tried to point out, I think on the first day, it's not that we were created by a loving, perfect God, right? That's what some people believe. But if that was the case, then why is there so much suffering? Why is there so much imperfection? Oh, they say it's because of Adam and Eve sinning, going against the will of God, and therefore we have to, you know, continue having suffering because of that. Anyway, some people find that explanation satisfactory, but yeah, it's still... Yeah, I didn't find it so. So yeah, to me it makes a lot more sense that because we're in this very imperfect world with a very imperfect body and mind and all these problems that happen again and again on a daily basis. Well, it makes sense that this is the case because the causes, the original causes for this whole situation are imperfect causes. They're flawed. Karma and afflictions. Ignorance, greed, hatred, and karma, actions done under their influence. So those are the causes for this, and so it's understandable. You have imperfect causes, you have imperfect results. Um, so just this situation, because it comes about from karma and afflictions, and while we are alive, as we go through life, we continue every day being under the influence of karma and afflictions. We're never completely free of karma and afflictions as we are now as ordinary beings. And while we're in this situation, we continue creating more karma that will bring about more similar experiences in the future, more dukkha. So it's like the causes are dukkha, the present situation is dukkha, and the future will be dukkha unless we do something about it. So that's why it's called pervasive. It pervades our whole life, our whole existence, that type of dukkha. And it also pervades the whole of samsara, because there are lots of different places, realms that beings exist in samsara, and some are amazingly beautiful and wonderful and fantastic and have almost zero suffering, but they're not free of this one. The beings there are still caught up in karma and afflictions. They're not free. So they may have a very long life and a lot of pleasure and almost no suffering, but sooner or later that life comes to an end. They die, and then they're back on the wheel, taking another life, another rebirth. So that's why it's called cyclic existence. Samsara is translated as cyclic existence because it's like a cycle. We keep going around and around and around the same experiences again and again and again, dying and being reborn, sometimes in this place, sometimes in that place, this type of body, that type of body. But it's all dukkha. Nothing within samsara, within this situation, is genuine, real, lasting happiness. It's all dukkha. So it sounds depressing, yeah, but the Buddha was just trying to point out what's going on, the reality. We do have to check for ourselves to see if that's true, if what the Buddha said really does match our experiences. But the whole purpose of the Buddha talking about this is to help us generate the wish to be free, to get out, because there is a way out. There is a way off the Ferris wheel, off the merry-go-round. Buddha found that way and is trying to point us in that direction, get us to go in that direction. He can't do it for us. We have to do it ourselves and we have to have the wish to do it, because it does take energy, but it can be done. So that's the reason why Buddha talked about dukkha, suffering, in the very beginning of his teaching career. But he didn't only talk about dukkha. He went on, that's the first noble truth. The second one is the origins, the sources of dukkha. So there he explained where do all these problems come from? Why are we in this unsatisfactory situation? And he said the main causes are those two things, karma and afflictions. Karma meaning actions that are done by someone with ignorance under the influence of afflictions. And then the afflictions themselves, that's the real problem. Because if we didn't have afflictions, we wouldn't create karma. So the real problem is the afflictions. And there's many different afflictions, but the main one is ignorance. So this is what I talked about the other day. I was reading from Geshe Yeshitapke's book, where it explained how, at the root, there's this conception of a self, an I, as something real and substantially existent, independently existing all on its own, not depending on anything else. So we have within our mind this conception, inborn instinctive conception of that kind of I, self, me. and we just immediately buy into it. And then on the basis of that, we generate these other afflictions, attachment to people and things that make me feel good, and aversion, hostility towards people and things that don't make me feel good or make me feel bad. And then other afflictions, jealousy, arrogance, laziness, and so on. There's a whole array of different afflictions that arise from this basic situation of ignorance about our reality. We also have ignorance about everyone else and everything else. Okay, so it kind of the way we see everyone and everything is not correct, is distorted. And that's our basic problem. And for me personally, it was helpful to learn that, that my basic problem is I just don't understand. It's not that I'm inherently bad, deluded, evil, or anything like that, but, just within my mind, there's this ignorance that colors and covers all my experiences and causes me to see things incorrectly. And so that's, I just don't know any better. So it helped me to have more compassion for myself, more kindness towards myself, and also towards others. Their problems are also because of ignorance. So that helps you to have more compassion and forgiveness towards even those who are doing really awful things. Yeah, they really just don't know any better. They're confused about the true nature of things. And they have these other afflictions in their mind they don't have any control over. They just come up and take over and just drive people to behave in those ways. They just don't know any better. Or even if they do know, if they've been told you shouldn't kill, but when you're under the influence of afflictions, it's like you're crazy. Yeah, like you just, yeah, like a crazy person. You don't have any control. Anyway, so that, where was I? Causes of suffering. So that's the second noble truth. The causes, the origins of suffering. It's basically karma and afflictions. And then the third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. So what that means is that it's possible to cease suffering and the causes of suffering. These are not permanent things that will exist forever and ever and ever, and there's nothing we can do about them. They are impermanent. So, and dukkha is impermanent, the causes of dukkha are impermanent, and there are remedies, there are antidotes that can be applied so that we can gradually reduce and eventually eliminate completely the causes of suffering. And that's the main thing, is if we can eliminate ignorance and the afflictions, then we stop creating karma to experience dukkha, and we can be free of this whole cycle, this Ferris wheel of dukkha, samsara. So the third noble truth is simply pointing out that possibility, telling us that does exist, that is possible for you to do. Liberation, nirvana, freedom from dukkha and its causes is possible. And then the fourth truth is the path, true path. So that is what we have to do, how to get free, how to attain nirvana. So when it comes to this fourth noble truth, this is probably the most important one, because this is the way out. This is the medicine, the cure, the solution. And there's different ways of explaining the fourth truth. One way is in terms, and this is what the Buddha himself spoke about in his first teaching. He spoke about the Noble Eightfold Path. That isn't taught so much in the Tibetan tradition. It is in the Theravada tradition, and it's also taught in a way that people can start practicing it right from day one. There's let's see if I can remember how it goes: right view, right thinking, right action, right speech, right livelihood. I may not have them in the right order, but anyway. And then right effort, mindfulness, and concentration. Yeah, so those are the 8. And where we can start, most of us, is with right speech and right action. So that means learning how to speak and act in ways that are um, wholesome or virtuous rather than non-virtuous. So the Buddha explained certain types of actions: killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Those are wrong actions because they bring suffering. So right action would be abandoning those, not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct. And so by refraining from those as much as possible, then we are practicing right action. And with right speech, um, that involves mainly refraining from lying, harsh speech, divisive speech that creates disharmony between people, and then idle talk, just talking about nonsense, things that aren't useful. Um, so, we can little it's easier to manage our body to stop ourselves from killing, harder to manage our mouth, very hard to stop. That's why it's good to have periods of silence. Less likely to create wrong speech. But yeah, with practice over time, we can reduce wrong forms of speech, and just by that itself we are practicing right speech. So not lying, not speaking harshly, and so on. But then, we can also go further than that and try to make sure that our speech is beneficial. We say kind words to people instead of harsh words. We say things that are useful and beneficial instead of things that are useless and nonsense and so on. Yeah. So basically, yeah, working on right action and right speech means reducing or stopping actions and speech that are harmful, and engaging in those that are virtuous and beneficial. So anyway, I wasn't planning to go through all the Eightfold Path, but another way of talking about the path is in terms of the 3 higher trainings, and this is actually a way of condensing the Eightfold Path. And the 3 trainings, they're called higher trainings in our tradition, are ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So those are said to be the most important practices to engage in to attain nirvana, to attain, um, freedom from cyclic existence, from samsara. So that's what I started talking about earlier in response to this question, that these 3 trainings are found, as far as I know, in all Buddhist traditions. So all talk about the importance of these: shila, samadhi, and prajna. So shila means ethical conduct or morality sometimes, and that has to do with our behavior, mostly the way we behave with our body and our speech, trying to avoid doing actions that are unethical, that are harmful, that cause suffering, trying to stop those, and trying to do the opposite actions, which are beneficial and ethical and the cause of happiness. So that's basically what ethical conduct, or shila, is all about. And so, yeah, that's said to be the basis of all good qualities, and also spiritual practice and progressing higher in our path to enlightenment. And then samadhi, number 2, or concentration, that's where we learn to focus our mind rather than having it wander here and there, be sleepy, dull. So developing a really sharp, clear, focused state of mind that we can focus on whatever we want to and then keep it there. So that's something we train in. Gradually it gets better. but it's also difficult. But those two, ethics and concentration, are both essential bases for the third training, which is in wisdom. And that is, well, there's different kinds of wisdom, but the main type of wisdom we need to cultivate is that of selflessness or emptiness, that there's no independently, substantially existent I, and also with regard to other people, beings, things, and so on. So understanding, how things really do exist, as opposed to how we normally see them. So that's the most important thing, because without that, we just keep circling in samsara. So it's the wisdom, understanding, selflessness, or emptiness that's like the key that opens the door and gets us out of the prison of samsara. But to be able to attain that wisdom, we need concentration. Because if our mind is distracted, unable to concentrate, we won't be able to stay focused long enough to develop wisdom. And to be able to have both concentration and wisdom, we need ethical conduct. Because otherwise, if our behavior is just out of control, careless, we do anything, everything, just don't care at all about what we do, then when we sit down and try to meditate, our mind is going to be very distracted, very disturbed, thinking about all the naughty things we've done and feeling regret, and then maybe fantasizing about other naughty things that we're going to do next, and so on. So our mind will just be wild and out of control. So forget about concentration. And if we don't have concentration, we also won't be able to attain wisdom. So that's why we need to start with ethical conduct. And on the basis of that, develop concentration. And on the basis of that, develop wisdom. But we can still be working on all three at the same time. It doesn't mean you have to have perfect ethical conduct before you try to develop concentration. And you have to have perfect concentration before you develop wisdom. So we can work on all three at the same time, but we shouldn't leave any of them out. That's the important thing. So I did find this quote from Lama Tsongkhapa's great exposition on the stages of the path, the Lamrim Chenmo, where he says, the three trainings bring to completion all the tasks of yogis and yoginis as follows. The training in ethical discipline makes a distracted mind undistracted. The training in concentration, or mental training, balances an unbalanced mind. The training in wisdom liberates an unliberated mind. And when they talk about liberating the mind, it mainly means liberating the mind from all the afflictions, the afflictive emotions, greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on. So it is possible to remove those from the mind and have a mind that is free of those. And that's the meaning of freedom. That's the meaning of liberation, nirvana. It's a state of mind which is no longer disturbed by, polluted by the afflictions. So that's one way of explaining the fourth truth through path. It's the path that leads to nirvana, liberation. And then there's some followers of the Buddha who wish to liberate not only themselves, but also other beings. You realize, there's all these other sentient beings, they're suffering too. They should get out, and I want to help them. And so for those people, the Buddha taught the Mahayana path, the Bodhisattva path, which is what we follow in the Tibetan tradition. So it's completely a matter of choice. Different people have different inclinations. Some are more attracted to the path leading to liberation. Others are more attracted to the Bodhisattva path. Partly it's perhaps imprints what you're familiar with from past lives, or also things experienced in this life, whatever, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, different people have different inclinations. Yeah, so for those who feel inclined towards this path, um, helping all sentient beings, then basically what we do there is first generate bodhicitta. That's the aspiration to become a Buddha, to become fully enlightened, so that we can help all living beings. Because helping living beings as we are now, there's not a whole lot we can do, right? Our ability to help others is very limited. But if we learn more about the qualities of a Buddha, what a Buddha is able to do, and then it becomes clear that, being a Buddha, I could help all living beings. And so we make that our goal, becoming a Buddha. And the real reason for doing that, again, is not for ourselves, but for the benefit of others, to be able to help others. So there's various meditations that you work on to cultivate that state of mind. You do it again and again until it becomes natural, spontaneous. And that's the point at which you become a bodhisattva. So a bodhisattva is someone who has this natural, spontaneous aspiration to become a Buddha. And in the beginning, it's an aspiration, but then it becomes more like a determination. I am going to become a Buddha. I'm going to do whatever it takes to become a Buddha for the benefit of others. And basically, what you need to do then is practice the 6 perfections. These are the main practices that you do to actually become a Buddha. So those are giving, generosity. Second is ethical conduct or morality. And third is patience or fortitude. And the fourth is joyous effort. And the fifth is concentration. And the sixth is wisdom. So those are the main practices one does to progress on the bodhisattva path and become a Buddha. And so you can see among those 6, it includes ethical conduct, it includes concentration, and it includes wisdom. So again, those 3 trainings that one also has to do to attain nirvana. But in the case of the bodhisattva, your motivation for practicing ethics, concentration, and wisdom is not just for your own liberation, nirvana, but to be able to benefit all living beings. So you have a different motivation for practicing them. So that's just a really brief overview of the Buddhist path, and there's a lot of details. Like in our tradition, the main thing we study and meditate on is what we call the Lamrim. That's a Tibetan term, and it means basically the stages of the path to enlightenment. And so in the past, Indian masters and then Tibetan masters kind of extracted the main points of the Buddha's teachings and arranged them in a step-by-step way, kind of like a Google map, that tells you, here you are, this is where you're starting from, and there's where you want to go, and this is how you do it. You go step by step. And so there's different versions of the Lamrim. Some are really long and extensive, others are very brief. And so, we learn that and meditate on that. And so within these various teachings, paths, and so on, going back to the main topic of our retreat, there are methods and tools that we can use to help us with grief when we're experiencing grief. So, for example, like in the Pali or Theravada tradition, one of the main things meditated on are the 4 establishments of mindfulness. That's probably the main practice that's used to make progress on the path and attain nirvana. And within that, you are training to learn about and recognize the three, what are called the three characteristics of things, which are impermanence, the impermanent nature, how, we've been talking about that, how our bodies and all the things in the world around us are subject to change. They are changing all the time, but we normally don't recognize that. So we need to meditate on that and get familiar with it and eventually realize it, really see impermanence. So that's a really effective method for dealing with grief, because if we just get familiar with how it's simply in the nature of things to change, things are not permanent. And so then when something, does change, even in a major way, like somebody dying, it's like, well, that's normal. That's just how things are. So we'll be less kind of shocked and upset. Probably still some, like that story of Ananda. He certainly heard a lot about impermanence and thought about it, but he was still pretty upset when Shariputra passed away. And just thinking about the Buddha passing away, he just, that was too much for him. But yeah, but it can definitely reduce grief and sadness when we do encounter loss. So impermanence is a very, very helpful method. And selflessness. Okay. Oh yeah, I was talking about the three characteristics. So it's impermanence, and then dukkha, just how, in our ordinary unenlightened existence, all the things we experience are not really satisfying. And so we need to recognize that so that we generate the wish to get out. Like if a person is in prison, and if they don't recognize that being in prison isn't really great, I mean, most people do, but some people might think, it's not too bad here. I get 3 meals a day and, bed. And so they could actually get kind of attached to their situation and not want to leave. Or what often happens is when they do get out, then they commit some crime to come back in again. So maybe that, I don't fully understand why that happens, but they get kind of comfortable maybe in prison, and it's hard to live outside. So it's important to recognize, the faults of being in prison, in case you don't see that already, so that you have this strong determination to free yourself from it. So it's similar with samsara, cyclic existence. We have to recognize its faults so that we get ourselves out. Otherwise, we just stay. We're like complacent and just keep doing the things that will keep us here instead of doing the things that will get us out. And that's why it's important to contemplate dukkha, recognize the situation that we are in is flawed, imperfect, unsatisfactory, so that we become disillusioned, disenchanted with samsara. And so, again, meditating on dukkha, like all the different forms of dukkha in our world, will help us be less shocked and upset when someone does die. We'll still feel sad, like with this news this morning of Jeffrey Hopkins passing away. I felt very sad, but not really surprised. It's like, that's just inevitable. We're all subject to death, and it's going to happen to all of us. It's just a matter of time. So you have somewhat less upsetness the more you're familiar with the nature of samsara. And then selflessness, that's the big one. That's the main thing that helps us overcome the causes of suffering and can help us deal with grief. So we're kind of running short of time now, but what I plan to do is to bring in some more specific methods, like especially from the Mahayana tradition, thought transformation methods that we can use when we are facing difficulties such as grief or any other kind of problem. So these methods are really wonderful. They're kind of magic. Not in the sense, I didn't mean that so literally, but if you know these methods and you use these methods, they can be really helpful, really effective in dealing with problems, difficulties. Um, so there was another question on this same piece of paper from yesterday. It says, just as my ordinary mind has no central controller, does a Buddha mind have no central controller? My understanding is no. There's no central controller in anybody's mind. And I mean, to understand a Buddha's mind, you have to pretty much be there yourself to really understand a Buddha's mind. But what they say in the teachings, from what I've studied, they say that it takes a long time to become a Buddha. You spend many lifetimes creating the causes, like developing your love, your compassion, your patience, your generosity, your ethical conduct, and so on, the six perfections. You create a lot of merit, virtue, that kind of positive potential. You make a lot of prayers, resolves, like, I want to do this and I want to do that. So you do that a lot, a huge amount over a long period of time. And so by the time you reach the end of the path, you've got this huge stock of merit, of positive energy, positive potential. And then when your mind finally makes that switch from being unenlightened to being enlightened, that's what keeps you going. They say that a Buddha doesn't have to think about what I'm going to do. Oh, there's this sentient being who's suffering. What can I do? How can I help them? They don't do that. It just happens spontaneously as a result of all that merit, all that energy, all those causes that they have created. So they say Buddha's activities are spontaneous. No need to think. And in fact, they say in the Buddha's mind, there aren't even thoughts, conceptions. That's our minds that have thoughts and conceptions. Buddha's mind is beyond that. So it's all that merit, that positive energy, and all those good qualities that they've been cultivating for such a long time that causes Buddha's activities to benefit sentient beings. So there's no central controller, there's no self or I, something substantial, permanent, fixed inside their mind that's doing it. I mean, that's my understanding. I can't say I really understand that, but that's what they say in the teachings. It's kind of mind-boggling, mind-blowing, but maybe I'll do this question too. I'm stunned. I didn't know that Prince, I guess referring to Prince Siddhartha before he became Shakyamuni, was born fully awakened. I thought he attained awakening under the Bodhi tree. But today you said those human experiences were not human experiences, but of an enlightened, awakened being pretending to be human. So sorry to ask again, but did I understand correctly? Yeah, so there are different versions of the story of the Buddha. Different Buddhist schools of philosophy, tenet systems, and so on. They do explain the Buddha's story differently. So in our tradition, in the Mahayana tradition, at least sutra, because in Tantra there's other versions as well, but in the sutra tradition it said that, Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment long ago in another world, Akanishta, Pure Land, which is where everybody becomes a Buddha. That's where you go before you're a Buddha. And I don't remember all the details, but where he was for a while. But then, so at the time when he was born here in this world as Prince Siddhartha, the son of King Shuddhadana and Queen Maya, there was a Sambhogakaya form in Akanishta, which I can't remember the details. I have to look it up. But anyway, the emanation of the Buddha's mind came into our world and entered the womb of Queen Maya. And there's a whole story about her dreaming about is it elephant? Yeah, six-tusked elephant coming and entering her womb. So that was the dream, but it was actually, kind of a symbol of the Buddha's mind entering her womb. So yeah, that's the Mahayana version. So he was already enlightened, but just taking the aspect, showing the aspect of being an ordinary little boy, baby, and then a little boy, and then he grew up and left home and went and sat under the Bodhi tree and attained enlightenment. So he did all those things to teach the beings in this world and to turn the wheel of Dharma, because it said that yeah, Dharma is something that's always been around, but it goes in cycles. So sometimes it's present in a world and sometimes it's absent. So the Dharma, the path to enlightenment, was absent in our world and needed to be. And so it was the right time for that to happen. And the Buddha decided, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to come into this world and show the aspect of becoming enlightened, and then turn the wheel of Dharma, teach the Dharma, the path leading to liberation and enlightenment for the beings in this world. So that's how it's explained in our tradition. I am in no position to say which story is true, but there are these different stories, different versions of it. But yeah, feel free to go with whatever version of the story you're most comfortable with. So there's a few minutes left if anyone has a question. It won't take too long. Stunned. You're still stunned. Sorry.
Thank you so much for your teachings, Venerable. Truly appreciate them. My question, I think, is going to end us on a happy note, I'm hoping. Is there room to hope that a long sojourn in the God realm or the upper realms where everything is blissful as you described could possibly habituate that sentient being to happier times, and when they fall out, propel a motivation to do whatever's necessary to get out due to their prior imprints of an absence of dukkha?
Okay, let me see if I understand. You're saying if there was someone who'd been in like God realms, which are more blissful and pure for a long time, and then they came to this world where there's more dukkha, then their previous experience would propel them to work for the benefit of others. Yeah, quite possible. Mm-hmm. It just pops up in my mind, this story. This couple that I met, well, I knew them for some time, and at one point I met them with their two sons, and they told me that one of their sons, when he was small, he talked about coming from some higher realm. I didn't get all the details of that. But now, in recent years, I've heard this young man is studying the Dharma and teaching. Already teaching. He's studying. He's following the program of the Geshe program, doing those studies, and he's already teaching and helping people. So that's certainly possible. Because to be born in those higher realms, you have to create a lot of virtue. So you must have done a lot of good stuff already to be in those realms. And when you're in those realms, you don't do any non-virtue. There's no, well, it depends on which of the realms, but there's much less non-virtue in those realms than here. So again, you're accustoming yourself to virtue and not non-virtue. So it's, certainly possible. I mean, some of them might still be self-centered. I can't be sure, but some of them could be very altruistic, and when they come into this world, continue having such altruism. Because you can see that with children. Not that I'm a mother, but I hear from mothers and observe, some kids just have this incredible kindness and compassion and don't even want to eat meat, like they're natural born vegetarians, and this compassion for animals and people and so on. So Buddhism would say, well, that's a carryover from past lives. They had those qualities in past lives, and the imprints are still there. And other children, it's a different story. They like to kill, kind of, yeah, different. So yeah, the kind of traits you see in children, often from very early on, these are um, carry over from previous lives. And again, that shows how important it is to try to cultivate good qualities as much as we can in this life, because it will influence us in our future lives as well.